Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Stewardship Mastery. We will be getting started in just a moment. Thank you all for being here on time. Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to this session of Stewardship Mastery, where we are going to focus on health, wellness, and vitality in retirement. This is part of a summer series that we have been conducting. This is the middle session. We have another session coming up in August where we're going to focus specifically on cognitive health and maintaining a healthy brain during retirement. So I appreciate you all being here. I'm going to go through a couple of the standard disclosures as we have a number of new attendees tonight, just so that you know some of the restrictions that we have because of my industry as it relates to Zoom. So give me just a moment and we will cover those um, right here, I believe. Give me just one moment. Technology is great when it all works. Um, so the reminders about tonight. Industry regulations require that the chat feature be disabled during webinars. Content is educational, should not be considered investment advice, and especially given tonight's topic, should not be considered medical advice because we're going to cover some areas as it relates to strength and longevity and wellness. And please remember that these are educational only. And of course, the required disclaimer before starting or changing any significant exercise regimen, it's always great to get confirmation from your healthcare practitioner. Session is being recorded, and once it is posted, we will send everyone a link and a follow-up that will include a PDF summary of the content and a link to the new YouTube channel that we have started. Your feedback and questions are always welcome. And the best place to send those is service@franklies.com. Thank you for being here. Now I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment and tell you a story. When we first moved to Virginia and decided we were going to live in the country, uh, we rented a home while our new home was being built, and we met the sweetest lady living right next door to us. And when we introduced ourselves, she just said, "You all just call me Aunt Helen." So have no idea to this day what her full name was. She was just Aunt Helen to all of us. And as best I could guess, some things you don't ask, Helen was probably in her early 80s at the time. And I remember one morning it was time to take the trash out, and I was hauling trash from our garage across the driveway and across the street to the place where it was going to be picked up. And coincidence, Aunt Helen happened to be doing the same thing with her trash. And I looked over and I said, "Aunt Helen, can I give you a hand with your trash this morning?" And she looked at me and she said, "Sonny?" And I knew I was in trouble because as soon as she said Sonny, I thought, uh-oh, am I going to regret this? And Aunt Helen went on to say, "Sonny, I've probably been hauling my trash longer than you've been alive, so I'm doing just fine. Would you like my help with yours?" I looked over at her and I said, um, "No, thank you for asking. I'm just fine. I'm going to stay in my lane." So sweet Aunt Helen gave me a lesson. And part of that lesson is also the privilege that I have in the role that I play in the lives of my clients. And I get to see people who thrive in the season of life known as retirement. And I also have the opportunity to witness people who struggle during that season of retirement. And nothing in what I'm going to share tonight is in any way judgmental because there are certainly things that we can control and other things that we can't. Um, but Aunt Helen gave me a glimpse into one of the characteristics that I've observed in people who thrive during the season of life known as retirement. And some people choose to limit possible areas of resistance. So they may decide to downsize into a home where everything is on one level, or they may rearrange the home so that ergonomically everything is easier for them to function in. Sometimes they stop certain activities. But Aunt Helen, I think living in the country gave her a reason to keep moving and to stay engaged. I have clients that garden. I have clients that love to tend to their lawn and take great care of their place. So, what one person does to try to limit those potential areas of resistance, another person does because it keeps them engaged and keeps them having a reason to move and to stay active and to stay fully engaged. And I'll be always grateful to Aunt Helen and for every client that has given me the opportunity to play a role in the unfolding of this wonderful chapter known as retirement. So tonight is very special because we have another guest interview. But before I jump into the PowerPoint slides and before I jump into the guest interview with Dr. John Jaquish, I wanted to take a moment and to say thank you. And when I say thank you, I mean it from the bottom of my heart. When we started Stewardship Mastery, it was when the pandemic hit and we were all told to stay at home and the opportunity for communication, everything had to be sort of reimagined. And my intention was that we would do a few stewardship mastery sessions and we would get on the other side of the pandemic and then things would kind of go back to normal. But what I found was through the communication with clients that you keep showing up and keep staying engaged and keep appreciating the opportunity we have to share the content that we share. So I'm really expressing my gratitude to you for the privilege that I have of being in this role in your lives. And I also want to extend gratitude to a few other people who are very special, and I believe one of whom might even be tuned in tonight. So, some of you that have been faithful to attend so many of these stewardship mastery sessions may remember when the pandemic first hit, I reached out to a friend of mine, Dr. Joseph Parent, who's a noted psychologist. And Dr. Joe, one of the books that he's written is called A Walk in the Wood. And he walked us through, no pun intended, the role that mindfulness and meditation can play in maintaining a healthy inner state during periods of stress. Some of you also remember a gentleman named Lee Holden. And Lee Holden wrote a book called 7 Minutes of Magic and has also done numerous specials on public broadcasting, where he has taught people about the importance of flexibility and balance in some of the Eastern traditions, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, that can keep us flexible throughout the course of our lives. I was very excited when Dr. John Jaquish, who I interviewed on Monday of this week, agreed to participate. Dr. John Jaquish has created some incredible technology that has proven really effective in dealing with bone density challenges. And he's also invented a strength training system called X3. And I was thrilled that he agreed to allow me to interview him, which we did Monday for tonight's session. So thank you to you for continuing to show up and find value in these sessions. And my gratitude as well to those who have given their time so that they could also make a contribution to the health and well-being of those people that I'm privileged to serve. A couple of quotes from Men's Health magazine before we jump into the PowerPoint for tonight. And keep this in mind. I suppose I can't run out of disclaimers when we talk about exercise and things that contribute to longevity. But every form of exercise has its benefits. Some may have different benefits than others. And when we interview an expert in a field like Dr. Jaquish, you're going to find he has some pretty strong convictions about his method, which I totally respect. Every method has its place. So, a couple of quotes from Men's Health magazine. After age 30, you lose about a half pound of muscle a year, which turns into 2.6 pounds of fat per year. That's the bad news. The good news, if you kept on reading, older adults, and if you're like me, your definition of old changes every year, 1 year at a time. Older adults have the ability to achieve strength similar to those decades younger by engaging in simple strength training routines. So the bad news is that we all age chronologically. The good news is we get to play a very powerful role in the quality of life and the quality of how we age, not just that we age, but how we age. And that is really the subject of this summer series and tonight in particular. So hold your breath for just a moment while I share my screen. I also want to let you know that during the interview portion with Dr. Jaquish, his audio settings were slightly different than mine. So when we get to that point, you might want to turn up the volume on whatever device you are listening to. So with that being said, hopefully everyone can see these slides. Now, the Fountain of Youth. So much has been written about, spoken about, thought about what really is the Fountain of Youth, if there is such a thing. What if it wasn't a pill? Or what if it wasn't one of these incredible breakthroughs in technology that we're hearing about on a regular basis? What if the Fountain of Youth was nothing more than a series of choices that you and I make on a daily basis? Donald Hensrud, MD from Mayo Clinic, put it this way. If we had a pill that accomplished everything that physical activity does for overall health, we would prescribe it for everyone. And the famous Honolulu longevity study, those in the highest quartile for strength, lean muscle mass, showed a 250% increased chance of living to age 100. Now, you often hear people talk about the importance of flexibility and balance as we age, and those are absolutely high priorities. But the Honolulu Longevity Study speaks specifically to the topic and the focus for tonight, which is strength training. Sometimes we associate strength training with something that is only done by athletes or done in our younger years. But what we're learning by research is there is a very strong connection between strength of body and longevity of life. So, where do we start? Flexibility and balance. I have clients that rave about chair yoga, others that practice Tai Chi. Qigong, for those of you that are not familiar with that term, Qigong is one of the same Eastern practices that yoga and Tai Chi are related to. Very slow, mindful movements that help with flexibility, that help with balance, and help with breath work. I've heard them described as a form of moving meditation. Pilates, jazzercise, kettlebell. Sorry, kettlebell should be kettlebell. Now, strength training. Yoga, believe it or not, is a form of strength training. It is not just for flexibility, free weights, resistance bands. And specifically tonight, we're going to talk about a system called X3, which is one of the inventions of Dr. John Jaquish that I will be sharing the interview with shortly. Listen to this from 7 Fitness Strategies That Work, an article I came across while preparing for tonight. Resistance training is non-negotiable. It is the foundation of injury prevention and healthy aging. Resistance band training. This comes from Dr. Jaquish's New York Times best-selling book, Weightlifting is a Waste of Time. His quote, resistance band training, and X3 specifically, builds muscle faster than conventional weightlifting in far less training time and at the lowest risk of injury. Again, from his book, Weightlifting is a Waste of Time. Some of the resources that I would point you to and that I studied in preparing for tonight, and again, these will all be included in a PDF document that we will send out following the presentation, as well as once compliance has reviewed the webinar, we'll post it on our YouTube channel. So we'll send everyone the document that summarizes the content, as well as the link to the YouTube channel in the event you'd like to watch it again or forward it to anyone else. When we talk about a DEXA scan, for those that have not done this, there's a great article and some science behind the DEXA scan, which is essentially a scan that determines the health of our bones, bone density. And it's one of the scans utilized to, in some cases, diagnose, and in other cases, monitor the effectiveness of treatment for osteopenia and osteoarthritis. So yoga, aarp.org/yoga for bones. Some Medicare Advantage plans may include gym memberships. So check your specific plan for details. Last year, I had some clients who were preparing for a trip overseas, and one in particular started going to the gym at the age of 80. So thank you for that example that we are never at an age where we can't benefit from strength training and improving our conditioning. Ponder the question, what if aging was optional? Now, as I said before, the chronological aging is not optional. We know that every day we are going to be one day older than we were the day before, but the fascinating research is helping us to learn that how we age can make a significant difference. And yes, there are ways we can turn back the clock and regain strength, range of motion, and flexibility that we might have had years or in some cases decades previously. Here's the quote again about losing muscle mass. So in the absence of us being intentional about including strength training in our regimen, this statistic from Men's Health magazine should be a wake-up call. And as Dr. Jaquish will refer to this in the vital role that the organs play, it's really essential for overall health that strength training and conditioning be a part of that commitment to overall wellness. And again, as with any change in exercise, consult your healthcare professional or personal trainer before beginning a new program. And I would give this distinction there. I would encourage you to be mindful that you are primarily the one responsible for your own health. That's true of your financial health, and we are certainly privileged to be in a role where we assist in that role, but you are also the one ultimately responsible for your physical health. And it can be helpful sometimes in our Western mindset to be reminded that the person that we go to when we're sick and may help do tests and a diagnosis and put us on a regimen to regain health might not necessarily be the same health practitioner that we go to when it comes to maximizing our fitness. So I share that with you simply to consider as you think about the team of people in your world that can help you maximize the health potential that you have. In the course of studying for this, the idea of a perfect day came up. And I have some clients that literally just retired within the last couple of weeks. And there's no doubt that there is an adjustment to retirement. There's an emotional adjustment, there's a psychological adjustment, there's a physical adjustment, there's a contribution adjustment. It is a major, major change in life. And I don't want to minimize that level of disruption. And my encouragement to them was that they would find their new rhythm and their new routine. So what I'm going to share here in what we call the perfect day are simply components that might be a part of your recipe for a day that keeps you vital and engaged. And a perfect day actually starts the night before. In fact, in our next session, when we talk about brain health, I'm going to share some statistics on the impact of sleep and the quality of our sleep and how it impacts our brain health. So when I say a good day actually begins the night before, it's so that we don't underestimate the importance of a good night's sleep. One of the authors that I'll be recommending in this next session wrote a book where he puts people into certain archetypes for their sleep-wake patterns. So you may even, some who are attending tonight, you may be morning people. Others may be like, no, I don't do morning. So I would prefer no one talk to me, look at me, or try to engage with me before I've either A, had the cup of coffee, my caffeine, or just some time to come to life. And in some cases, you're married to someone who's very different than you are. Um, so a morning walk can be a great way to set the stage for a day and also can go about setting those circadian rhythms that are part of an overall approach to wellness. Breakfast and what we're learning about strength training in particular is that our bodies use protein for that. So, again, as you consider your specific approach to nutrition, I would just encourage you to research the role protein has in a healthy body and in specific to our conversation tonight, the building of muscle. Meditation and prayer has so many benefits, whether it's lowering of stress, reminding ourselves about the worldview that is bigger than what we may hear on the headlines or see when we scroll through our phones. So that time every day to have a reset in the form that serves you and reflects your own personal beliefs is vital. Obviously, we're not going to skip lunch, afternoon exercise. There are some people that prefer morning to be their time for more rigorous exercise, and it sets their metabolism on track for the rest of the day. Social engagement. We covered this in our last session, and one of the startling statistics was that the level of social engagement, and more specifically, social contribution, has direct correlation to our ability to remain independent longer and to maintain an activity level that can lead to a healthy and vital retirement. Dinner and then obviously bedtime, those rituals, and I will share something that I am working on personally, and that is I am learning from all the research that there is a direct impact on how late we access screen time and the quality of our sleep. And we might like to ignore that because I'll admit, sometimes I enjoy watching a show on my iPad or checking news feeds toward the end of the day. But what we know about, especially the light that is transmitted from electronic devices, that it has a disruptive impact on those circadian rhythms and our body's ability to convert serotonin, which fuels us during the day, to melatonin, which calms us and prepares us for a good night's rest. Some book recommendations for you. So it's fascinating for me to study these various fields, and I'm going to share a few quotes from these books, but I wanted to mention these in particular. Weightlifting is a waste of time. Now, this is probably as good a place as any for me to give you some disclosures about my interview with Dr. Jaquish. It's not uncommon that someone who is a leader in their field has pretty strong convictions about their beliefs and their methodology. So expect nothing less from Dr. Jaquish. And I have to share a story with you because this is part of what goes on behind the scenes that in some cases provides great comic relief. At one point in the interview, um, yes, Dr. Jaquish will poke some fun at different media outlets. Please don't let that turn you off to the rest of what he has to share. And then he also is talking about studies that have been done in university settings on strength training and conditioning. And he makes some comments about you probably don't want people from these majors because they might already be athletic and they might already be weightlifting. It's kind of their normal routine. he made a comment, you might want to pull people from the music program because they may not be as acclimated to exercise physiology. And then he said, and you probably want to avoid the communications majors because they're the easiest ones, and that's where the athletes go. And I thought to myself, do I do I tell him or not that I was a communications major? And I just decided not to tell him that. Um, so communications major, minor in business. Just know that there are things in the way Dr. Jaquish communicates where his level of confidence can sometimes come across as critical of other areas that are not consistent with his thinking. But please don't let that put you off to the brilliant research he's done and what he has to share. Forever Strong is a great book by Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, where she also, and they have nothing in common, so they don't promote each other's work. There's just a growing body of evidence on the vital role that strength plays in our ability to age well. So the interview with Dr. Jaquish is going to be the last part of tonight's Stewardship Mastery. Before we get there, I wanted to share with you the dates for our next session, and that'll be specifically on cognitive health, your brain in retirement. And this is an area of great fascination. In some regards, we had some personal experience with this when we had a family member experience some traumatic brain injuries that weren't adequately diagnosed at the time. So we were forced to go into a deep, rapid study of some of these issues from circumstances beyond our control. Um, However, by the grace of God, that same deep dive study also enabled us to be a resource for some clients who had been early diagnosed with some cognitive challenges as well. So, this area of brain health is so vitally important. And I know that there are people on the call tonight where you are dealing with a family member who has some level of cognitive challenge that you are dealing with. And I hope that this next session on August 21st serves you well. Okay, let me make sure that I have one quote to share before I start the interview with Dr. Jaquish. And that is this. It's not uncommon that as areas in society develop, that something that is initially discounted or dismissed, then with further evidence becomes something that experiences less resistance, and then finally is ultimately accepted as truth. And people thought, well, this was self-evident, whether it's things we learn about nutrition or things that we learn about strength training, or we change the food pyramid because we learn things about how our bodies process different things at different times of our lives. So keep an open mind as he shares with you the role that strength training plays. And I think if you can look past a few of his overly strong convictions, he is a brilliant man. And I personally have been using his strength training system for over 5 years, and I absolutely love it. So, time for our expert interview with Dr. Jaquish. You may want to turn up or have your hands close to the volume on the device that you are listening to. And I would simply say enjoy, because when Dr. Jaquish agreed to do this interview, he didn't really have to. He didn't know me from Adam, but he is so high in the conviction of what his research has led him to that he's willing to be a voice for that. And I'm grateful for that and hope that you enjoy. Two things in particular he's noted for. Um, and I'm not going to tell you the story because it's in the interview, but OsteoStrong is a franchise that has very high-tech equipment that has actually been patented and proven to stop and reverse loss of bone density. So it is incredibly fascinating stuff, both in its sophistication and its simplicity. I've had a chance to test some of the equipment. Just brilliant, brilliant stuff. And then Dr. Jaquish transitioned from that research into strength training. And the X3 system is what he will talk about there. So you may hear reference to OsteoStrong. That's his scientific development that is targeted toward bone loss. And then his X3 system is a system that anyone can utilize for their own strength conditioning. Um, Here's my thank you slide. I wanted to do this before in case anyone needs to check out during the interview. Uh, Always love to hear your feedback. Service@franklies.com. We will be sending follow-up information on tonight's content to each of you. Our phone number, and now for the interview with Dr. Jaquish. Dr. Jaquish, thank you for coming to Stewardship Mastery. My kids growing up were huge fans of the Avengers. So when I hear that you are referred to as the Tony Stark of kind of the wellness industry, that's high praise. So
Sure.
tell me a little bit about your kind of the impetus for your research, starting with your mom's diagnosis for osteoporosis, please.
Yeah, my mom was diagnosed with osteoporosis, and she kind of came home in a panic when she got her DEXA scan, which told her she had. She was kind of right at the diagnosis level, and they gave her a brochure for, I think it was Boniva, which is the standard bisphosphonate treatment, and has been for I want to say like a decade and a half, maybe 2 decades now. So she read about the side effects, and she's like, basically my life's over. Like her three favorite things were hiking, gardening, and I don't even remember what the third thing was. It's been so
It'll come to
long.
you.
Like it was like she loved hiking and she loved gardening, and it was like I can't do, oh, shopping. Yeah. And she can't. It's just my wife shares that love. So she said I can't do anything anymore. Like going on like long walks. Like if I miss a curb and break a hip, like I got a 50% chance of death within a year, which is the statistic for hip fractures over the age of 50. So she was just terrified, and then she looked at the pharmaceuticals, and the side effects were sort of just as bad. So she had no interest in taking them. And she says, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And so I thought, well, can I read about it? Like I'm sure this is not the death sentence you think it is. And as I read about it, I thought, wow, this is a disease that's not a pathogen. It's not like you can catch osteoporosis. It is a condition based on the lack of mechanical loading. So why don't we just add mechanical loading? Well, the problem with that is traditionally mechanical loading of relevance comes from high impact because in weight training, we don't use enough force to do anything at all to bone. So the minimum dose response for bone density in the hip, and by the way, that's the important part. Like density of the spine, yeah, I mean, that's a quality of life thing, but that has a lot more to do with your posture than anything. Um, but that's not the life threatening part of it, it's the hip joint. So the minimum dosage of force to go through the hip joint is 4.2 multiples body weight. Well, like the guy who holds the world record squat, I don't know if he holds it. I don't think actually, I'm pretty sure he doesn't hold it anymore, but it was a little bit ago he set this. But he's a 300-pound guy and he has a 1,200-pound squat. So that's 4 times his body weight. Even he, breaking the world record, did not achieve the minimum for bone loading to stimulate bone growth in the hip joint. Now, high impact does that pretty easily. If you drop from more than 20 inches of height, you're getting 4.2 multiples body weight. So basically, just standing up on like a park bench and jumping off of it. But when you look at the osteoporotic population, that's not exactly the activity you want them doing.
Right.
Now, they could build up to that, and there's an argument that supports that idea. But ultimately, why don't we make impact level loading just safer? So put somebody in the position they're naturally going to absorb impact, and then have them self create force. So, like with the upper extremities, I can put my hands out in front of me, 120-degree angle of inclusion from upper to lower arm. I can either produce or absorb the greatest amount of force in this position. So we use that same geometry for the legs, the spine, the core, and the upper extremities, like I just demonstrated, to put the greatest amount of forces through the musculoskeletal system to induce bone density growth. And
It's
that's
such a fascinating approach that you took. In Western medicine, we seem so programmed to think that if we just take a medication and we have an absence of a disease, then we're healthy. And you took a very different perspective on that and began studying the impact of, especially people in gymnastics, and what that
right.
load does to strengthen the bone. And that led you ultimately to the creation, in partnership with Tony Robbins and others, of OsteoStrong.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's where OsteoStrong came from.
talk a little bit about what someone might expect walking into an OsteoStrong facility.
Looks probably like a doctor's office a little bit. You walk in, no, I mean you can see the equipment when you walk in. It's not like there's not private exam rooms, and part of the reason is everybody who does it looks the same. So if your grandmother does it or if an NFL player does it, they look exactly the same while they're doing it. So there's no like loss of dignity. Like that was one of my goals in design. You want people to be in a position while they're doing it so that they look good, and so getting in a position to, load extremities at the impact ready biomechanics, yeah, it really looks good doing that. So it's we want people to do it in front of other people because it's very encouraging because you see older people getting to a very relevant level of force to trigger bone mass development. And then everybody else in the room is like, well, this 90-year-old woman can do it. I can do it. Like, yeah.
My son and I went to a Tony Robbins event, and some of your equipment was stationed there. So we had a
Sure.
chance to test it out. And what I love about it is how you have woven complexity and simplicity together, in that the effects are complex, but the experience is really very, very simple and is one that has very, very low risk for anyone, even someone over the age of 65 who is looking to address some loss of bone density. So
Right.
I love the connection between the complexity of the benefit, but the simplicity of the activity itself.
Yeah. Yeah. It ended up being just a pretty straightforward thing to do. And the risks are low. There's always a risk of injury with anything you're doing with physical medicine. But they're certainly lower than anything that would be associated with bone density development, just because of what I explained about the risk of impact.
Right. And you had mentioned some of the side effects of the medications that are typically prescribed. And I always include disclosures when we cover things of a medical nature that people should seek the advice of their own healthcare practitioner before
Sure.
starting or stopping any protocol. So
Right.
we don't want to undermine that relationship, but it is easy because we become programmed in the Western world of,
Mhm.
is there a pill I can take for this?
Yeah.
So, as you were doing your research, what were some of the common side effects of the osteoporosis medications that you found?
Oh, well, the biggest issue with bisphosphonate drugs, so there's a whole bunch of different names for anything that fits in that category, but these are drugs that encourage not, well, they basically stunt the metabolic process of bone. So you're not getting rid of older bone, you're retaining it. But so basically, the bone that would normally starts off in the middle of the bone, then works its way to the outer cortex, and when it's on the very edge of the bone, then it ends up going into the bloodstream because just it breaks down. So there's a building and a breakdown all the time, and these are these can be measured by blood tests. There's the CTX or the BAP test, which shows breakdown, and then the P1NP blood test gives you a measure of anabolic activity in the bone. Now, obviously, the anabolic activity is much more important because bone building is going to give you higher bone density for typically 30 years. So when you build bone and it's really in the matrix of the bone, that's going to do you favors for a long time. Whereas when you retain old bone, that's only going to do you favors while you're taking the drug. Because the second you stop taking the drug, it sheds. And then while at the same time, the standard test was a DEXA scan, dual X-ray absorbiometry. That's what DEXA stands for. So bisphosphonate drugs made the DEXA scan look really good. Does that mean it fixed the fracture problem? Or does that mean it just made the bone look good from the perspective of the test that was being used? There is very conflicting evidence, and I would say because there's conflicting evidence, the answer is probably no. It doesn't really resonate. Like it doesn't make much sense. So I think the whole effort behind the bisphosphonate drugs was maybe okay for somebody of imminent fracture risk. Maybe somebody in their ninth, 10th decade of life. They're 90 or 100, and they're not going to be able to really engage the body to build any bone density with their own self force generation capability, because that's what's required. You can't do that. Well, okay, those medications could definitely, or they can definitely have a place, because not every solution is right for everybody. But I think it's pretty unfortunate when somebody who's, let's say they have early onset menopause, which forces them to lose bone density earlier, which is a bigger problem later. So, somebody's 50 years old and they're considering putting them on a bisphosphonate drug, which is really a temporary fix for a symptom, not really addressing the problem. It doesn't seem like the best idea to me.
Especially when you consider
it reconciles with the physician's oath of do no harm.
You can't help but wonder the impact, especially if diagnosed at that stage in life, of such prolonged use of those medications. And certainly every medication has its place, but if there are other alternatives, that's part of the genesis behind your work and the solutions that we try to present to clients as well.
Yeah.
So is it really true that someone in let's say a 15-minute session in a OsteoStrong facility can generate the level of exertion or force that can actually lead to the slowing down and even reversal of osteoporosis?
Yes, that's
The,
the purpose.
the research in your book, which I have read several times and highly recommend to my clients, and it's funny, I've got a son who loves to work out, and we have one thing in common, and that is when we go into our exercise room at home, that's what we have in common. And then I come out 20 minutes later and he comes out about 90 minutes later. So have not yet gotten him to understand the efficiency behind the strength training that you do. And I'd like to transition there for a moment, if I could. Talk a bit about how your research went from the bone density issues to strength training and ultimately the development of X3, which I'll speak from my own personal experience, has been the most consistent, non-harmful form of strength training that I've ever done. So I love the tool myself, but talk a little bit about what led you from bone density training to strength training, if you would, please.
Sure. Yeah. Once you experience variable resistance for in a short amount of time, a couple weeks, and you see your jumps in strength like so quickly, you realize like, weightlifting was just dumb. Like we have different capacity, like in our different ranges. I'm 7 times stronger here than I am here. Knowing that, why would I ever lift a static weight? It makes no sense. So that was the impetus behind the book. And it originally I was just going to write a book because I didn't want to get in the fitness industry. Like that's an industry that's like a $0 billion industry. So I just like wanted to explain how you want to train more with banding, with like big heavy latex banding or other more advanced polymers bands. But you can't just grab a band because a band wants to twist your wrist, it wants to twist your ankle. It's not conforming to the body. So you need something to stand on that the band can move freely underneath, and you need a bar that the band is hooked to because you can't have your wrist being twisted. That causes neural inhibition, and you'll never be able to actually get a meaningful stimulus because your joints are hurting. So as I was kind of drafting this book, because I thought it was just going to be like I was going to write this book, take a month to do it, and then focus back on where my where my career was, and developing and promoting the bone density technology. But I realized really quickly this wasn't a simple argument because most people have been just indoctrinated, like like Arnold did it, so like I got to do it the same way Arnold did. Well, that's great. Arnold had some amazing genetics. How come everybody that signs up at a gym doesn't look like Arnold? Now there's performance enhancing drugs, but there's plenty of natural athletes. Like if you look at the NFL, they're drug tested all the time. Now, yeah, some guys still, there's about 2 or 3 guys that get caught every year. So do they still do it? Yeah, a little bit, but they get caught. So you look at guys who are in the NFL, okay, why do they seem to put on incredible amounts of muscle when they're like 15, 16, 17? It's not because of drugs, because you don't get that in high school, or at least not when you're 15, maybe when you're 18, I guess. But these guys are genetically predisposed to being able to put on muscle, and the rest of us are not. So, like Lifehack last year did a study where they determined that within 90 days, 90% of people quit their fitness routine. So people who made a serious commitment, they're like, I'm gonna work out whatever, 4 days a week, 6 days a week. I'm going to absolutely focus on getting in shape. And within 90 days, they quit. Now, do they quit because they got great results? No. They quit because they got zero results. And this is the story of, I think, well more than 90%, because I think some people who don't quit within 90 days are just stubborn. They get nothing and they just figure they're just going to keep trying to change their routine a little bit, or maybe, oh, I have a creatine deficit. Oh, okay. Like whatever. Like the the vast majority of people just don't have the genetics to be able to, and this is the key here, to fire enough muscle, to engage enough muscle in the weaker ranges of motion. So you don't have much trouble recruiting muscle out here, but as you go back, a lot of people don't have the tendons and ligaments, the insertion points, what they call it. So everybody's origin of their pectoral is on the sternum, but the insertion is typically right at the top of the humerus. Unless you're a genetic outlier, then it's further down, which means you have a lever inside of your body. So that lever is going to force you to recruit more muscle when you're back here recruiting to push away from you. So some people are just designed to grow a lot of muscle. The vast majority of us are designed to not grow a lot of muscle, at least if we're lifting static weight. But if you go to variable resistance, well, now all of a sudden the resistance is accommodating. So it's less resistance where you're weaker, more resistance where you're stronger. So you get to exhaust the musculature to the most extreme degree. Whereas these people who are not of genetic benefit don't even really get to take the majority of their muscularity to fatigue at all. Because by the time they get to the bottom of the movement, they're hardly firing anything. And they're like, oh, okay, I'm done. I'm exhausted. No, you're really not. It's just you're not firing enough.
And I
You're
can
not
tell
recruiting
you
enough muscle.
from experiencing that exhaustion firsthand, where, 5 minutes after a workout, your hands are still shaking, because one of the beautiful things about X3 is that it takes you to that point of full muscular exhaustion
Right.
to where you have done a workout.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when I think of my typical client over the age of 50, and wondering if they make a decision that they're going to start weight training, there has to be a safer way to do it than by them deciding they're going to start bench pressing at the age of 60.
Right.
Have a client in the last couple of weeks that's been diagnosed with some early bone density loss, and she has a number of pins in her right wrist from a previous injury. So the idea of doing a bench press, for example, for someone with a compromise like that, you seriously wonder about the safety as well as the efficacy, as you pointed out. So I love the simplicity of it. I'm curious, having been in the research as long as you have and creating the system that you have, and I know you travel extensively. And when I travel, also, I see these strip malls where there used to be a gym or a fitness facility there. And I'm curious what you have found in terms of why they seem so resistant to variable resistance training and want to continue to build these facilities out with equipment that is of
It doesn't do
questionable
anything.
effectiveness.
Most people are just lemmings.
The
They're
quote in
not
your
people.
book that I thought was great was, "It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it."
Ah, a quote from Upton Sinclair. And I think a lot of people who there's never been like a scientist who said anything. There's been a couple of hacks who've said some negative things about me, but I mean, they're just like they're the losers, they're the bottom of the barrel. The people who are actual science-based lifters, they'll never say anything negative against variable resistance. But keep in mind, their business model is teaching people how to go into gyms and get benefit. And basically, variable resistance is not allowed at most gyms because now, I mean, they're seeing it from a worst case scenario standpoint. A lot of time when somebody's got a band hooked to something, they don't know what they're doing. They, throw the band over, a little hook that's on the edge of a rack that normally holds a dumbbell, and they're pulling on it, and it knocks the whole rack over because they don't realize that in the fully contracted position, they're recruiting enough muscle to create hundreds of pounds of force, and they don't realize that. So that they're knocking racks over. So like you go and look in a gym, and you'll see either no bands available, like hanging for people to use, or you'll pull one out, and somebody will be like, "We don't allow bands in here," and it's just for like liability, but they're imagining that you're going to do something outrageously stupid with it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas X3 is a self-contained system. I tell everybody, it says, right inside the box, don't hook the bands to anything other than the bar and the plate. Like, don't throw it over a tree branch. In fact, there's a example. It wasn't an X3 band, but somebody bought an exercise band so their kid could have like a little like swing to like play in the yard. So the mother threw the band over, just looped it over a branch, and her kid was bouncing up and down on it. And of course, it snapped the branch off. Branch comes down, paralyzes the kid for life.
Oh.
Right. You know, I would have seen that coming, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why it's like don't. It says right when you open the box, don't hook the bands to anything other than what it's intended to be connected to, because people don't realize that their stronger range of motion is way stronger than the weights they lift, because the weights they lift are limited by the weaker range of motion. So yeah, it's not the most simple argument, It's also not what like Arnold did. So there's that. Like people want to just sort of embrace, I guess, the tradition. Oh, the hardcore guys did it this way. It's like, yeah, well, you don't have their genetics or their drugs. You have nothing in common with them. Good luck.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny. I talk to a bunch of 20-year-olds and they roll their eyes at me. They're like, "Oh, we'll see," because they think they do have those genetics. And then 5 years later, they're all ears because 5 years have gone by where nothing has happened to their strength development. Absolutely zero.
And speaking of strength development, it seems like almost on a daily basis, there's this growing body of research connecting strength with longevity.
Yes.
So, can you take a minute and maybe address that? Again, thinking of advice you would give to a room full of people over the age of 50 about that vital connection between strength and longevity.
So your the reason that your organs function is to supply the musculature with what it needs. Once you lose musculature, your organs don't have a reason to function very well. Therefore, they start to fail. Most death is from frailty of older people. And when they write down frailty, they really saying this person was just weak as hell and muscles place no demand on organs. Therefore, everything just failed. So that is why high levels of strength and low levels of body fat are the two things that are basically uncontested as far as drivers of longevity. Those are pretty much the only two things that are uncontested. So, you can have studies back and forth about cholesterol. I mean, there is an actual truth there, but our the American Medical Association has decided to hide that truth for whatever reason. But the um, the real drivers, high levels of strength, low levels of body fat. Well, if you want that, it's a pretty easy path to follow. Like you should be strength training. You shouldn't look into any other kind of exercise.
So, if someone is of the mindset where they say, okay, I want to head down this path, um, one of the first things they may do is they may go to a sporting goods store and pick up some resistance. I
Mm,
use that term loosely, band like this.
yeah,
Talk a little bit about um, the specific design of X3 and how it's different than other approaches to strength training that are just bands. And you
right.
approach this in your book as well,
Oh
talking
yeah,
about what happens when the wrist twists or when the ankle
right.
becomes placed in
Yeah,
a dangerous
bands
position.
bands by themselves are worthless. That's one of the reasons why like band training, and also it's pretty obvious. People want a really simplistic explanation. Like it's got to fit into a meme. I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but like a sentence fragment with a silly picture. That's like people want their like all of their health advice to fit into like a sentence fragment with a funny picture. And sorry, it's just more complicated than that. And if you're the lowest common denominator kind of person, well, I mean, people OD behind 7-Elevens all the time who are just like that. So, don't be one of those people. Learn a little bit. Um, I think that the sort of acceptance of what we've been told, that needs to stop. Ridiculous. Lied to about everything. Also, you've been lied to about nutrition, like to an unbelievable degree. You've been lied to about nutrition. Kings used to feed poor people uh, plants with meteor seed pods, and they told the peasants that this was better for their health. Meanwhile, the kings and the nobles all ate meat. They didn't say that because it was actually about health. They said that because it was cheap. And nothing has changed since then. Not a thing. So, if you want to believe what the overlords tell you, well, then you're just stupid. So, um, people need to come to grips with the idea that maybe they haven't been told the truth. Maybe they should learn a little bit. And when you do, you'll come to very obvious conclusions like strength, like prioritizing animal protein. You need it. You're dying if you're not having animal protein. You know, the fact that people who only eat vegetables, they have to take out just a laundry list of supplements to keep from having malnutrition problems. Well,
Hmm.
maybe it's because their entire nutrition outlook is a malnutrition problem. You know,
It,
sorry.
it's
I
interesting
know.
when you think about, even the food pyramid that was the basis for nutrition for how many years, and come to find out there are flaws in the assumptions. There were some things that were
Oh, it's
uh,
fraud.
right,
It's not just, it's not flawed.
right.
It's fraud.
And
They
and
sound similar, but they're not the same.
well, and one of the premises of the first book that I wrote was that financial freedom can only come through personal responsibility. And I think the same
Love
holds
it.
true for our health, wellness, and vitality. And that is, there comes a time when people are free to elicit the opinions of others, but it's got to be coming from a place of personal responsibility. Otherwise, people won't engage. And I have this unusual perspective of seeing clients that age well during retirement. They stay fully engaged. They continue to put demands on their physical body, their spiritual contribution, their social engagement. And I see others that do not age well and they shrink from that. And their comfort zone becomes more of a prison than a comfort zone to them. So, what advice would you have for someone, again, saying specifically over the age of 50, who says, okay, I'm going to get started on a path towards strength training and conditioning? Maybe what advice would you give them in terms of starting well so that they don't become one of those 90-day casualties where they try it for a
Sure.
while and then it ends up falling by the wayside?
Um, Number one, this is going to sound a little bit self-promoting, but read the book Weightlifting is a Waste of Time. It will be incredibly eye-opening, and it's loaded with evidence. Like literally nobody has ever criticized that book. I've sold 600,000 copies, maybe 700,000 at this point. I don't know. It's been a while since I checked in, but very popular book. Not a single scientist ever told me anything other than congratulations, it's an awesome book. And I think a lot of people came into it thinking like, oh, come on. They started to read it and then they saw all the evidence. I posted studies and graphs from studies and tried to really educate people. So it's like, I think sometimes people use science sort of like shiny object, look over here, don't pay any attention to what's happening over here. Yeah, I didn't do that. Like, here's the study, and like here's some of the details, and then here's the conclusion. It's like, all right, well, you can't misquote a study if you pull 20 sentences from a study. Like if they're all kind of about the same thing, well, then it's not, you weren't cherry picking. You were really doing the work. And so that's number one. Number two, don't pay attention to influenced sources of information. So as in, don't ever watch CNN because they're lying to you about your health. They're telling you the wrong thing. Don't ever watch MSNBC ever. They're lying to you. Don't pay attention to the American Medical Association. They're lying to you too. They are completely bought and paid for. They are basically lobby groups for snack food companies and pharmaceutical companies. Like they're not there to protect your health. In fact, that's not even their mission at all. So just realizing you're just going to take yourself and depart from the information that you've been forced to view and seek your own information. I've noticed that in the beginning, 2 years ago, AI would lie about a lot of things. It's like what's the optimum human diet? They would say like, oh, veganism, like that's what's going to make you live the longest. They got caught. Somebody's influencing, somebody put some if then statement on top of the AI. It says, this is how you have to answer that question. So AI has kind of grown up a little bit and realized if it's really going to be the source of truth, it actually has to be the source of truth. And if you get AI lying to you, like if they say something like vegan or vegetarianism is good, which is an outright lie, say, well, say, well, what about the last 10 years of research that demonstrates how LDL cholesterol is indicated for longer life as opposed to shorter life? Then it'll say something like, oh, well, if you consider this area of research, then it's a completely different story. So, it allows you to sort of catch it in its lies. So, nothing wrong with AI, but just know that it is first conditioned to talk to stupid people. But if you call it out and say, like, but how does that reconcile with this conflicting information? Then it'll give you the real answer. So I think that's a positive if you want to do your own research and use AI, but also ask it real questions. If you ask it super biased questions, it'll just give you what you want.
Right. And I've personally enjoyed the Facebook community for X3
Mm.
because you are in it on a frequent basis, possibly even daily. And when
Daily,
a
yeah.
question gets asked, whether the question is about form or frequency or nutrition or different protocols, I don't know that I can recall you giving an answer where you don't cite science to support that answer. So, social media can have its upsides and its downsides, but being able to immerse yourself in the trek of like-minded people who are
Yeah.
trying to accomplish some of the same things, I have found what goes on in your X3 Facebook page enormously helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, we try and keep that a really good forum. It's just great questions and great answers.
Right.
Yeah,
So
and I encourage anybody that has, apprehension or a little bit skeptical. Like when I was writing the book Weightlifting is a Waste of Time, I was skeptical. I was like, am I crazy for like thinking this? Like I challenge myself constantly to like is this really correct? Like should I really say this, or am I just on one side of the issue and I've talked myself out of listening to the other side? And the answer is no. Like variable resistance is superior. Um, it doesn't dismiss the fact that weightlifting works for the people who are genetically predisposed for it to work. But here's another huge weakness in all sports performance studies. The subjects in sports performance studies are typically recruited out of the sports performance department. So, very often they're freshman students. They want to be involved in whatever they can. Oh, being a test subject in a study, they sign up. They get paid $50, and they were going to work out anyway. So like whatever they're told to do, they stick to it because they're interested in finding out how it all works. Because someday maybe they're going to be writing some research. There's a huge flaw in this. If you major in sports performance, it probably means you respond to weightlifting. You're probably part of that small, maybe 5% of people who you lifted weights and it worked. And you kept on lifting weights and it kept on working. Okay, congratulations. You're a genetic outlier. How about we recruit students for these studies from the music department? Why don't we do that? I know why they don't do that. Because it would be like, well, nothing happened to either group. That's why.
so true.
Yeah. Like, and I would put a caveat on that. Don't recruit from the business department or the communications department because a lot of guys, there's a lot of type A guys in business, and comms is where all the athletes are because it's an easy major. You need less credits to graduate with it. So it's like try and avoid athletic people when you want to do sports performance studies. Whoa, you're gonna hardly have anything publishable. So I mean, this is just it's an obvious truth. here's another crazy thing. I was talking to Dr. Milo Wolf, who's awesome researcher, and we worked together on some research. I funded some of his research. Um, I shouldn't say I didn't do any of the actual research. I just wrote a check, but I was up to speed on what he was testing. And he told me that it's just so difficult to find studies for trained individuals. So it's almost impossible to find a large enough test group where people have been doing strength training for more than a year. And so I said, well, why is it hard? He says, because there's almost nobody like that. People quit. I wonder why.
Well, I'll speak from personal experience. So I played golf in college, so not everybody even considers golfers athletes. But as we age, and the experience that I went through
Mhm.
finding X3 and making kind of a renewed commitment to my own fitness, the results speak for themselves. So it's almost like if you could buy someone 90 days free from the biases that you just referred to and let them experience it for themselves, you would have to wonder how much of a different perception people would have.
Absolutely.
Is there any age at which someone can't benefit from a new or renewed commitment to strength training?
I don't believe so. Like a lot of these things that we've been told, and like when I was younger, it was like, oh, if you're not muscular by the time you're 30, it'll never happen for you. Like, okay, well, I started X3 on my 40th birthday. That's when I got my prototype from the machine shop. I was working with a machine shop that mostly built race cars, just because I race cars. So,
Mhm.
uh, and like it was night and day. Like I put on, I think 35, yeah, I don't think I remember, 35 pounds of muscle the first year. Um, it was like people who didn't see me for a year, like my fraternity brothers, graduated a long time ago, they bump into me, they look at me, they're like, I hardly recognize you. You're like a different guy completely. Yeah.
And
Um,
and you document your journey in the book so people can read about that experience and then they can see the pictures that you post at different stages to see it for themselves.
sure, sure.
So, what's next for you, given the research that you've done, the work that's going on in the OsteoStrong facilities around the country, what you're doing to kind of revolutionize strength training, at least in the modern era with variable resistance? What's on
Yeah.
your agenda
Well,
for?
I'm not going to stop until I get the whole world to realize how dumb weightlifting is, how just inefficient. Even, by the way, even the genetically gifted people get better results with variable resistance because they're still firing more muscle here than here. Just that's just the way musculature works. The shorter it is, the more of it you have engaged, the more mechanical tension you can create. So work the muscle in accordance to its variable capacity by using variable resistance. The closer you look at it, it's just the absolute obvious way to train. But there's a lot that is missed, a lot of obvious things that get missed
Right.
by people who've been told the wrong thing.
And it's encouraging to start to hear more and more of professional athletes, high level amateur athletes, sports
Oh,
teams that are taking your research to heart and integrating variable resistance training in what they do.
absolutely. Right now, so we're working with Westside Barbell. We actually have a training program with Westside Barbell, but this training program is very special. This training program is what Westside Barbell uses with NFL players and with like mixed martial arts, like combat sports. So, and it's all based on X3 because not everybody can fly into the west side of Columbus, Ohio. Every time they need to train, like athletes are on the road, they need
Mhm.
to be able to take their workout with them. So, because of all the strength and conditioning coaches that work with Westside Barbell for their programming, that it seems like, as far as we can tell, 100% of the NFL is using X3 in some capacity. No, I mean maybe they're given the programs and they choose to apply, 50% of it, and they want to go off and do their own thing on some other stuff. That might be possible. But every NFL player I meet, I'm like, "Hi, how you doing, John?" They're like, "Yeah, we know you're the X3 guy." Yeah, like they know me better than I know them.
Yeah, it's exciting research, and I'm personally am grateful for the work that you've done because other than doing some work with dumbbells, I had not been consistent with strength training, and X3 is so beautifully simple to utilize. When I travel, I throw it in its case and throw it in the back of the car or check luggage, and I can take
Yep,
it with me and get my workouts done. It's not an exaggeration to say I can be in and out in 20 minutes a day,
that's right.
even with kind of the updated protocols that you are constantly working on and updating.
Mhm.
So it's been fabulous, and my encouragement to our listeners is to not make the mistake of thinking strength training is just something for elite athletes or people who have to make their living from that. It's
Thank you.
vital for all of us in different ways. And I'm grateful for your research and your
Thank you.
passion in bringing that message home.
It's funny, like a lot of women are afraid of strength training because they don't want to look like men. It, the more strength trained a woman is, the more feminine she looks. Like they have that backwards. I don't know why. In fact, cardiovascular exercise gives you the opposite of what you want. What people think is cardio burns body fat, strength training builds muscle. What's actually accurate is strength training builds muscle. The only thing that's really going to influence your body fat is your nutrition. And from the perspective of metabolic health, which is how quickly you chew through the energy that you consume, has much more to do with muscularity. Because muscle is an engine that's running 24/7, that's cleaning up your metabolism, that's using energy, that's putting demands on the body to produce more energy. So you're a well-oiled machine if you're strength trained. And then when we look at endurance type training, there's no two systems of the body. It's not like when you're doing cardiovascular training, you're like working some part of the body that's not used during strength training. It's all the same muscles, same heart, same lungs. So the difference between strength training and endurance training is endurance training is strength training that just doesn't do shit. Like that's it. That's the end of that story. Like you're just going to beat up on your joints. Is there a cardiovascular benefit? Yes, very temporary. And then you're also wearing out your joints. So, you see guys in like their mid 50s, they got all into like marathon running when they were in their mid 40s and they're like, I can hardly get out of a chair now. My joints hurt so bad. Well, that's funny. I'm 48 years old. I don't have any joint pain anywhere in my body at all ever. And I'm, a lean 220.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I personally love to run. I just enjoy it. I've never run competitively. I just kind of enjoy the quiet and so forth. But my knees and my back at 63 are
Right.
not big fans of me running. So,
Right. And you've probably moderated your distances.
oh yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the
And,
only thing you can do.
and when I first heard you talk about how X3 can elevate your heart rate to the point where it is a cardiovascular workout,
Mhm.
I'll admit I was skeptical because I'm thinking, how does this work? But
Sure.
um, after working one of your sets to full exhaustion and you feel where your heart rate is, once someone experiences that, they will realize that there are distinct cardio benefits even from strength training, which might surprise a lot of people.
Yeah.
So, in closing, John, first, thank you for being so generous with your time.
Yeah.
I applaud you for your work, for being willing to contradict some long held paradigms when they're not true and they're not serving us any longer.
Yeah.
What parting advice might you give to the individuals who tune into Stewardship Mastery and are looking for both financial security, but also a quality of life and longevity that gives them the chance not just to live a long life, but to live a long life well. What final words of encouragement might you have for them?
Ooh, it's very, very similar to what you asked before. Like you need to try and be as strong as possible. That, I mean, that's just like, planning for the future. The bigger your investments are and the more secure things, the higher the percentage of monthly income goes into something that grows and compounds interest. Like, wow, like that's the equivalent of strength training for your future.
I once saw a study that showed for every dollar that was invested by corporations in wellness programs, there was a seven-fold return on that because they weren't treating an illness, they were actually affecting health. And what I so admire about your work is that it has the same philosophy embedded in it, and that is health is not the absence of disease. It's being vital, it's being strong, being flexible. All the statistics that we see about what happens when people don't make their health a priority during that final chapter in life, it doesn't have to be that way. And I applaud you for your work and look forward to your continued work as you serve people and help shape some new paradigms that I think will help us to redefine longevity, not just as living longer, but living longer and better. So,
Great.
Dr.
Thank
John
you so
Jaquish,
much.
thank you so much for being generous with your time today. I appreciate it greatly.
Awesome. If this helps, if there's a lot of questions, we can do it again.
All right, sounds great. I may take you
All
up
right.
on that. So, looking
Great.
forward to sharing this with our audience on Thursday night.
Awesome.
All
All
right,
right.
all my
Thank you.
best. Thank you. So, if you've stayed this long, would you like to see what this X3 thing looks like? And again, I would uh, Dr. Jaquish is brilliant in his field. His work on dealing with osteoporosis is fantastic. I happen to check. There's a OsteoStrong facility in Westfield, Indiana, and they're popping up in different locations. They're extremely high tech and effective at what they do to deal with the bone density issue. But since you've stayed with me this long, let me just take a minute and share with you what X3 looks like. Now, a couple of disclosures. Um, I'm not an influencer. And when Dr. Jaquish is critical of them, if you've ever watched or listened to an influencer who is peddling or promoting a different product every month, you realize that they're getting an affiliate fee or they're getting some compensation for it, which doesn't necessarily mean their advice is biased, but it can certainly lead to that. So I get no compensation for this. If you decide you want to try X3, I'm not an affiliate, so zero compensation to me whatsoever. So in whatever form you choose to continue to make your health a priority, I applaud you and I honor you. In fact, many of you have heard this conversation from me. When a client retires, I will typically look at them and say, okay, your charge is to try to take such good care of yourself that you outlive your money. And my charge is to make sure that doesn't happen. So, to that end, I hope tonight has served you. And I thought maybe I would just give you a quick look at the elegant simplicity of this system. And I do want to encourage you, if you choose to explore X3, and you can go online to the Jaquish Biomedical website and order it, have a conversation with someone. The customer service team is phenomenal because there are some things about your height and your weight and your build that might factor into the particular bands that you choose to utilize. So at 5'9", I'm not the tallest person in the world. I know my sister did X3 for a while, so she needed some different bands because of her height and weight. So with that being said, here's what X3 looks like in its elegant simplicity. And I realize that you can't make everything out on video, but I'll do the best I can. This is the ground plate, and the band goes underneath the ground plate. And the reason why the ground plate is so important is because it helps to keep your feet, your ankles, your knees, and your hips in a neutral position. And the problem with just using bands by themselves, they can put you in a somewhat compromised position. Um, the other part of X3 is a very high quality steel bar, and the connecting points on the bar are where the bands connect. And there are a variety of different bands and different colors that have different resistance levels so that you can kind of dial in the resistance level that's appropriate for where you are in your journey of health. So when I say I love the simplicity of it, there's a little case you can get for it and take it when you travel. I like the fact that some people like to work out in a gym. I would prefer to get my workout done at home. We live out in the country a little bit, so if I can get my workout in less time than it would take me to travel to and from a gym, that makes me a happy camper. So I would leave you tonight with this question. As it relates to evaluating your health, your wellness, your vitality, and whether it was our previous session on the MIT Age Lab study on 8,000 days and that framework for looking at the season of life known as retirement, whether it's this session where we talk about the vital role of strength training in longevity and how it adds to not just length of life, but quality of life, or our next session where we're going to talk about cognitive health in retirement. My question is, what's your why? Because if your why is clear enough, I believe you will find the source of motivation and the right resources to help you along your particular journey. Um, I love staying fit at my age. I love being able to bend down and pick up my 4-year-old grandson and not have things pop and ache. I love the feeling of if I want to go play some golf with some buddies and we play at a golf course where the golf course is still set up where you can walk and carry your bag. I enjoy being able to do that. So each of us have our own why, and I would simply leave you with the question tonight, what is your why? And if the why becomes clear enough, I believe you will be led to the correct recipe of how that will allow you to have this season of life be one where you remain vital, flexible, strong, cognitively sharp, so that you can maximize the return on how your life is invested. And that's what we refer to as your true wealth. I hope tonight has served you well. Look forward to seeing you in August for our focus on cognitive health. Blessings to you and yours. Good night, everyone.